Hello, and welcome back to All Things Lord of the Rings, with your host Alex, also known as Solanus Dracone. At the time of this recording, I seem to have made it another week without someone calling me out on something. Well, okay, one thing. Rakino cautioned me about my usage of the word flew when I said the Balrogs flew out to help Melkor. I want to make it clear that I meant hurried and not actually flew. The subject of whether or not Balrogs can fly, or even if they have real actual working wings, is a pretty hot and shadowy topic of debate, and so we're totally not going to get into that. So onward we go, and this one's going to be a little long because I want to finish Feanor's story. Today we're going to talk about the flight of the Noldor, and no, they didn't actually fly either. When last we left off, Finwë, the king of the Noldor, had been murdered by Melkor, now called Morgoth, and the Silmarils had been stolen from Feanor and taken from Aman. Melkor made it back to Angband, and he set up shop again, to set about being an awful prick to the rest of the world, just like old times. The first thing Feanor did, after swearing the terrible oath with his sons, was to gather up his people and head off in force to firstly try to retrieve the Silmarils, and secondly go make their kingdom in Middle-earth, because at this point Feanor and many of his people had pretty much forsaken the Valar. Remember, please, always, the terms of the oath. Anyone who had the Silmarils and kept them from Feanor and his family were the enemy, and war would be waged upon them. This oath also meant anyone who stood in Feanor's way. And when I said that the fate of the Noldor was going to take a sharp downward turn, I meant it. Feanor wanted to get the hell out of Aman and on the trail of Morgoth, because while he knew that his people were righteously fired up, not all of them were on board with his plans of vengeance. Remember, only Feanor and his sons swore the oath. Because there were those among the Noldor who didn't want to follow that kind of terrible destiny that the oath would have burdened them with, Feanor knew that given enough time, his people might cool down and decide against following him. So he knew he had to act fast to get them mobilized and out while they could still get something done. I should also point out that by this point a bit of a division had begun within the Noldor. Some of them began to think their hot-headed new king might not be the best one for their people, especially since swearing terrible oaths of eternal vengeance. Actually, a rather large percentage was thinking Fingolfin would make a better king. Now, please bear in mind that Melkor's whisperings after his release but before his great treachery had already gotten most of the Noldor of the mind to go off and start their own thing in Middle-earth. But because of this division in who wanted whom to be king, the Noldor split into two different portions. Mind you, the matter as to who would be king wasn't completely settled yet, but they all pretty much wanted to go, and probably reckoned they'd sort it out when they got to Beleriand. That's at least my take on the matter. This is not counting a very small portion of the Noldor who just didn't want anything at all to do with any of this, and said they'd stay right the hell put in Tirion and continue following the Valar, but that was a very small portion. As Feanor had set out from Tirion, Manwë sent forth a message to the Noldor. Because Feanor swore that damn fool oath, he was permanently exiled, and they would do nothing to help him. Nor would they do anything to hinder him, because he and his people were always free to come and go as they pleased. But he urged them all not to go on this journey, because right now everybody's all pretty riled up with some really bad stuff having been said, and if they go on this path, followed this road to where it led, they would most surely come to ruin. Which is reasonable, because most people who do stuff in the heat of anger tend to really regret it later. But we know Feanor by now, and he basically said, lol, fuck off, at least we're doing something against Morgoth, and set out anyway. The Noldor didn't have any ships, and no one was going to cross the sea without a ship, obviously, so with his part of the Noldor, the ones loyal to him, they set out as the first force of the Noldor, the vanguard, to Alqualande, the main city of the Teleri who lived upon Aman. Mind you, this isn't counting the ones who lived on Tol Eressëa. There, Feanor asked to be given the ships of the Teleri to sail east and make war upon their foe and so forth. The Teleri weren't having it, however, because first and foremost they obviously didn't agree with Feanor's path, and secondly, because Manwë had said the Noldor shouldn't go, and the Teleri weren't about to go against something that the Valar obviously weren't on board with. I don't want to make it sound like the Teleri were rude, because they totally still considered the Noldor and Feanor to be friends. They just didn't want to help him with this mad quest of his. Plus, these ships were precious and treasured by the Teleri there, and they knew there was no way they'd be seeing them again. Feanor wasn't going to take no for an answer, however, and he and his vanguard began to just board the ships and start sailing them out. The Teleri were obviously pretty ticked off about this, and began to throw the Noldor boarders off of the ships. Things got hot, and swords were drawn, and they ended up killing a bunch of each other on both sides. This was a pretty heated battle, and it went on long enough for the second part of the army, ones led by Fingolfin's son Fingon, to catch up. When Fingon and his part of the army caught up, they didn't know why there was a fight going on. They only saw that their kinsmen were being killed. Some even believed that the Teleri were probably doing this on the Valar's orders, so without even thinking about it, they joined the fight, and basically the Noldor won. This event came to be known as the Kinslaying of Alqualande, and moral lines were drawn here between the Noldor who were there at the start of the fight and knew what they were doing, and the ones who came afterward with Fingon. This will come up again. Now taking their stolen ships, the Noldor host set off northeast along the shores of Aman. Eventually, they came to Araman, which was the northeasternmost corner of Aman, right up against Helcaraxe, which was pretty much Arda's Arctic Sea, and was a miserable, awful glacial mess, and they set up camp. There, on a hill, a lone figure stood and said, and I am paraphrasing, "You will all regret what you have done. None of you who participated in the slaying, who knew what was going on from the start, are ever allowed back into Aman. The Valar are now against the House of Feanor, and anyone who follows them in their oath will share their fate. Your oath will drive you and betray you, and will forever snatch away the treasures that you've sworn to pursue. Evil begets evil, and everything you start will turn against you, even if you mean well. You are all now shunned. Also, everyone who goes with them on this journey are going to either die by the sword or of your own grief, because you can't die any other way, and when your souls come back to Aman, they'll be imprisoned in the Hall of Mandos and not let out ever again, even if those you have wronged beg for it. Also, any who live and remain across the sea will forever live with the burden of what you have done, and grow weary, and be like shadows of regrets to the humans when they come. Also, treachery and betrayal will come upon you from within your own people. The Valar have spoken." Boom. Microphone drop. This pronouncement was called the Doom of Mandos, because it was believed by some of the elves there that this was Mandos himself who spoke to them. Now, obviously, this shook up a lot of the elves there, but Feanor was all, "We're not fucking stopping. We may be doomed by treason, but we won't be doomed by cowardice. They'll still sing about our deeds until the last days of Arda." Again, paraphrasing. Now, most of the Noldor there knew they were screwed, and they didn't have much choice but to go on. Some agreed with Feanor, some probably changed their mind about this whole thing, but their hands had blood on them and they couldn't go back. Only Finarfin and a small group of elves who came to the fight late, and without a proper understanding of what it was about until it was way too late, decided to turn back. And so they returned to Aman, begged for and were granted a pardon, because they only did what they did because they thought their Noldor brothers were being betrayed, and only fought the Teleri because of that, and not because of the reasons Feanor and his peeps did. Thus, Finarfin became the king of the Noldor, remaining in Aman. As for Feanor and the ones who went on, they came to a pretty bad spot. They set up camp for a bit in Araman. Since the Doom of Mandos had pretty much said betrayal was going to happen, then the fear of betrayal began to grip the remaining Noldor on the voyage. Lots of people, Fingolfin's people mainly, started to mutter that it was only a matter of time until they were betrayed too. Feanor, of course, heard all this, and decided why not fucking betray these useless pricks. They were probably about to betray him, especially the fucking Fingolfin. God, I hate him! Anyways, Feanor took counsel with his sons, and they agreed there were only two ways forward. Go over Helcaraxe, or take the ships and continue by sea. But because they had lost quite a few of the ships on the way up here, there weren't going to be enough to take everyone. Helcaraxe was a no-go. That shit was impassable. Feanor and his sons, however, decided they would take the ships and go. When they got to Middle-earth, Maedhros was all, "So, who are we sending back to bring the others? And who from the others are coming? Fingon, right? He's cool." And Feanor replied, "Fuck 'em," and had the ships burnt. Think about what a dick move that is right there. They stole these ships from the Teleri, killed Teleri to take them, and now they had burnt them down, in turn fucking over those who had still followed them. The doom of Mandos was at work. The only one of his sons who didn't participate in this was Maedhros. When Fingolfin and his people saw the red light of the flames from over the ocean, which was totally possible because the world was flat at this time, they knew they'd been left behind to die a frozen death, because Ahriman was fucking cold and miserable. Faced with either staying and dying, or returning to Aman in shame, Fingolfin decided they'd press on, because they were committed to reaching Middle-earth, and Fingolfin wanted to see Feanor again. I won't try to analyze why, just remember, Fingolfin was the one who forgave Feanor for holding a sword to his throat that one time. They journeyed across Helcaraxay on foot, a lot of them perishing along the way, and made it to Middle-earth. Think about how awesome an accomplishment that was, like Hannibal crossing the Alps. Now again, not analyzing anything, but even though Fingolfin might possibly still have been able to forgive his brother, most of his people held no such loyalty and were pretty goddamn bitter at Feanor. To wrap things up, we're going to talk about the final fate of Feanor. When they came to Middle-earth, they had set up a camp on the north shore of a lake called Mithrim. Also around this lake was a town, also called Mithrim, comprised of Sindarin elves, who, as you will recall, were the Grey Elves, the ones who stayed behind in Beleriand. These Sindarin elves told Feanor's people about King Thingol, and basically brought them up to speed on what had happened in Middle-earth while the Noldor were off in Aman. Morgoth had already committed one large battle against the Sindarin elves, but we'll get into that later. Now, Morgoth sent a whole mess of orcs to go take care of the Noldor before they had a chance to gain a foothold. The Noldor, however, proved to be more than a match for this ragtag type of force, and fought them off. This battle was called Dagor Nuin Gileath, or Battle Under the Stars. Feanor himself led a charge against the surviving orcs who tried to flee, and right inside of Angband, or more accurately inside of Thangorodrim, which was the triple volcano site under which Angband was built, Balrogs rushed out, and Feanor, taking down plenty of the foe with him, was mortally wounded by Gothmog, the Lord of the Balrogs. Feanor's forces caught up to him and drove the Balrogs off, but it was too late for Feanor. He died looking upon Thangorodrim, and knew with his dying breath that his elves would never manage to topple Angband by themselves. Then his fiery spirit consumed his body and left it as a pile of ashes. No other person on Arda ever died this way. And that's where we're going to cut it here, folks. I said I'd finish up Feanor's story, and I did. Much more is yet to come, for the Oath of Feanor and the Doom of Mandos was still hanging over the heads of his sons and the rest of the Noldor who came east. I want to thank everybody for watching. Once again, I am Alex, also known as Solanus Dracone, and this has been All Things Lord of the Rings. Goodbye.